Right, I'm not going to rush this, so if you want to watch this video, I'd settle yourself down with a cup of tea or something, because I'm going to try and go a bit slower than usual. Okay, so the question that was put to me, and I've left the email on the screen so you can pause the video and read it, is to do with scaling of objects in Bryce scenes, and the question of Bryce units has come up. Now, Bryce units, as far as I know, are just an arbitrary form of measurement, so you can't really say that they are anything in particular, centimetres, inches, miles, whatever. They just allow you to compare the size of different objects. So if you'd got something that was 4,000 Bryce units wide, you'd know it was twice as wide as something that was 2,000 Bryce units wide, but that wouldn't tell you anything about its intended real-world scale. I'm going to scroll this email down a bit so you can read a bit more if you got to the bottom of that. I don't know how fast a reader you are. So the aim here is to take an initial component that Marco has supplied. So we're going to look at his scene, which it will be quite interesting because I'll then set to see how he's setting his scenes out. I have a particular approach, and so I always start from a very similar starting position with certain settings, and so we'll have a look at that. And also he has sent this image, which is the sort of the idea. I'll bring it onto the scene. There we go. For how it should be laid out. And well, we're going to use this image to provide our information for how we should be scaling things, because I mean, I don't really know how big that is, that mountain, or how far away it is even. I'm going to make some educated guesses, or indeed how big this thing is that's supplied as our test subject matter. We do know more or less how big trees are. We've got that to go on, and we can see where this horizon line is fitting in, so we know a few things about eye line. So that's telling us things, but what we have here in this image is a composite of two things, and we don't know what the camera angle was for this image, that we can check in the scene when I load it, and we don't know what the camera angle is for this photograph, but I think usually it's around 60 degrees, I think. I don't know, I'm not a photographer, but we can see the effect of haze in the distance, and this is one of the main clues that I'm going to use, is that when you're scaling things in Bryce, you use the atmospheric effects to provide your sense of scale, because it's how things look. If it looks about right, then that's more important than being able to sit down and say, well, I have made this exactly to the scale in Bryce. You know, Bryce, if we said the Bryce units were miles, for example, or some fraction thereof, it's irrelevant. But let's say you have a scale to work to, and you do it, and then you render it, and then people say, well, that doesn't look right, because that's either too hazy or not hazy enough, or the clouds don't look high enough, and then you'd go, well, I made it to the exact scale. Well, that's no help, because in the end we're just trying to create the right impression. So we will work with this photograph, so I'll put that back on my other monitor and keep bringing it in when I want to raise points. It's very handy to have two monitors, but yeah, that's a luxury I have, and I can't assume that everybody else has, so I'll try and remember to bring it back in, because I often steal colours from the photographs I'm working from. Let us at this point launch the scene that I've been provided with, and we'll have a look at how it's set up. It's going to take a little while to launch, I should have thought of that. Okay, so here's the scene. There's our object. I'll switch to the overhead view. Right, so we've got a camera here, and the angle is, okay, we've got a scale of 5,000 odd, so that must mean it's zoomed in quite a lot. So this is a very narrow camera angle, and not really representative of a real-world camera, so I think we'll be changing that. So I'm going to bring the camera round here and turn it so it's facing what I call north. The reason for doing that is because when it comes to setting up the lighting, I then know that if I have the sun and move it round to the front here, it'll be in front of the camera, and if it's here, it's behind the camera, and there it's on the right of the camera, and here on the left, you know, all that kind of thing. Here it's right above us, and also that fits in with any HDRI that I'm using. The similar rules apply. We'll probably use a HDRI backdrop anyway, so we'll come to that at that point. So to begin with, then I'm going to set this scale to 100%, so we're not zoomed in. Then look at the camera angle. So that's still a bit too narrow. So I normally work in scenes at this kind of camera angle, but that can have a bit of a distorting effect. I happen to like the effect that that has, but might not be very appropriate for this example. So we're going to set that at, let's with a, oh, I don't know, 60 is a bit narrow. Let's try 90. Okay, let's try 90 and see how that looks. Right, what other things shall we check straight away? Let's go into the Skylab and make sure that this shadow intensity is set to 100. That's a good thing to look out for, otherwise it slows your renders down quite a lot. And we shall, let's check the render options. So we've got 48-bit dithering set, that's not really necessary. So we'll uncheck that. Render options. Okay, so we're in super fine art anti-aliasing. This I do not consider a good choice. If you want good anti-aliasing now in Bryce 7.1 Pro, then you have the options of improving the anti-aliasing, and you have a lot of fine options here. This is just a brute force method, and it tends to be very slow, and it does give good results, but at a cost of higher render times. And really, if you're going to go to the trouble of applying this, you may as well go to the trouble of using the premium effect, which is faster and allows you more options for, you know, final effects. This one does seem to be the slowest. It does give the best anti-aliasing, but at a very high cost. And if you fine-tune it here using these controls, and there's another video on my YouTube somewhere about how to fine-tune the anti-aliasing, you can get fine anti-aliasing without the overhead in render time. Anyway, a digression, though I did say I wasn't going to go too quickly, so it doesn't matter if we digress in this case. So have a sip of your drink and we'll get back onto topic. I'm just going to turn this to regular anti-aliasing for speed, switch to the camera main view, have a quick render, see what we're looking at. Okay, so we have got this sky set up as atmosphere off. Let's put a custom sky in. I always think that's a good starting point, and we can try and find this object, which is down there somewhere, up there somewhere, wherever the camera's pointing. So I'll lift this into view and have a look at this now. Oh right, oh, so it's not round. I'd thought it was round, but it's obviously oval shaped. Not that that matters, that's not significant. So I'll rotate this round a bit and make it a bit larger. In fact, what I'll do is I'll bring in the default ground plane to work with, just to give me a sense of scale, and then we'll lift this up and make it sort of that sort of size. At this point it's arbitrary, I just wanted to be able to see it in the camera view. So we shall now get on to considering, there's the horizon, putting in our terrain, because I'm going to use the terrain as the thing that's going to guide me as to where to position the things in the scene, so it's how it appears. So let us have a quick look at our reference image, and I'm going to check in the other view. Let's see, so that's a 4:3, so golden mean aspect ratio. So let's change the document setup to 4 long by 3 high, set the height to something like that, give that a render, and then I'm gonna tilt the camera back and try and match my reference image. So the horizon's about halfway between the two. So if I turn my horizon on, it's somewhere over here, I think, just to guide. Yeah, that's not too bad, I think. Probably about halfway there. And then have a render. So this needs to come closer to the camera if we're going to be looking down on it more, or lifting the camera up a bit. I'm just trying to get a similar amount of that in shot. So we're just fine tuning at the moment. Okay, that's a starting point. It needs to be over to the left slightly to match up with my reference image. Okay, and it looks like it wants rotating a bit. I don't suppose we need to worry too much about having it perfectly like the reference image. It just helps when it comes to visualizing things. So looking at my mountain now, there is a terrain built that's in the Bryce library for the objects called Big Sur, and that looks a bit like that, so I'm going to use that. So we'll go to create, find our terrains in this list somewhere. Here we go, terrain. Now I've got to try and spot Big Sur in here. I know it's in here somewhere. I usually just have to go through until the name pops up. Seem to remember it's Mount Baldy, not that one. That's not the one I'm thinking of. Ah, there it is. I don't know why I can't see it. There you go. Big Sur. Load that in. Give it a quick render. It's obviously too close to us at the moment, so I'm going to edit that, and first thing I'm going to do is make it solid. So if I do use more advanced lighting, and then I'll use a bumpy material on it, I want it to be solid, because if it isn't, then a light can get in through the back of the terrain surface, just the way it handles bump in Bryce. So I'm going to move that further away. Now, as an opening gambit, I like to set things to, well, let's see, its height is 1/4 of its X and Z direction. So I go for 4,000 Bryce units as being a good size that I can get to work with the atmosphere. If it's 1/4, it'll want to be a 1,000 high and 4,000 on the Z axis. There we go. Switch the overhead view and zoom back a bit. I'm going to actually, whoops, I'm going to change this camera here. So edit. Because I've made some changes and it'll get confusing, but I'll just move that out of the way. I'll turn the horizon back off so I can see all of the terrain. I'm going to modify that to blue, and I'm going to save as, so _M1 to show that I've modified this scene, and just in case it should happen to crash, but I've changed the colour of the camera so then I know that I've made some modifications to the render settings and all that, and particularly so that I can remember that I've turned the shadow intensity up, because otherwise then I'll think, oh, you know, have I done these things that are like the things in my own setup in a default scene, and then I'll see the colour of the camera is blue and it will no longer raise that question in my mind. I know if I see a green camera, then I'm working with a default scene generated by Bryce, and I know that that has these settings that I would then immediately go in and modify, hence the reason for changing the camera colour, just in case you were wondering. So let's get a hold of our terrain here, lift it up and move it back a bit and see how it's looking. So at the moment we're working with the default sky. I'm going to take the clouds out by holding the Alt key and left clicking there. Actually, I'm going to lift the clouds up first and then do that, so that gives me a thicker band of haze by lifting that up. I'm then going to modify the atmosphere. I like to work with a haze density of 100 and a thickness of between 1 and 2. So I'm going to go for 1.5 because that's between 1 and 2. I'm going to turn fog off, and I usually make that sort of grey colour, but we'll leave it for now, make these fine adjustments as we get further down the line, and edit this and rotate it so it's in front of us, and have a look at that and then our image. So this headland's running the other way to the one, well actually it could be that bit, but then we can see underneath the terrain, well the side of the terrain, so we don't want that. So I'm going to swap that around so that bit is on this side. So I just need to do a mirror image of that terrain to get it to look more like this one, I think. So I'll go to I've got a flip in here. If it's flip X, will that do the trick? Let's have a look. I think so. So I'm going to rotate this a bit and then move it off to the side and have a look. Okay, well, that's not too bad. And we see just slightly under the edge there, but that's not going to be a problem because it's going to hide that with some trees probably. And lower that down a little bit so it's beneath the 0 point, because if I put in a water plane, then that will cover that edge of land up. In fact, what I'll do is I'm going to load in a HDRI. I'll use one of Horror's, so to advertise this thing. So use HDRI, open, find HDRI by Horror, this one, I think. Okay, so this is just some a neutral the sun is actually somewhere here in front of us, but it's behind quite a bit of cloud, so I think that provides quite a natural backdrop. I'll lower the quality, I'll get rid of the specularity, render in scene. We'll see how much light output we're getting, and this will give us some ambient light. So we say about there, because the haze is going to add a bit to the effect. Enable the sunlight. Look at our reference image again to see where the lighting is coming from here. So it looks like it's coming over from the left corner, the left side. So I'll move the dominant light source over to the left, and if that's on the left and that's where the sunlight is in the HDRI, we can match that, hold the control key down, and you can just rotate on its axis there, so we can move the light for the sky around. Because I've loaded a HDRI image, I'm going to re-engage the haze, and as you can see, it's added quite a blue tint to that, but you can change that using color perspective and make it more neutral by off balancing with red and green if you want to do it that way, or you can modify it by changing the haze color, which I'm going to change it to a little bit of a grey color so it doesn't look like it's brightening things too much. So after a few modifications, let's come out and have a look and see. This terrain is obviously a bit grey and not like the one in the picture. So we'll have a look in the library now, in the material library, and we'll go for something from the Pro materials, and I'll pick out, let's see, I think I've got something in here that might do the trick, or in here, I can't remember which. I just want something with some snow on the top. Maybe I've got it somewhere else. Let's have a look. Just something. I know I've got a terrain with some snow on the top. This one here. This one here's got some snow on the top. So we'll load that in and have a look at the position of the snow. So we've got a very hard line of snow, and that's not like our picture. Our picture shows that the snow's higher up, and it's sort of not such a hard line. It's a bit of a distribution between that and that. Now you may say, well, why am I meddling with that when the idea was to talk about the scale of the objects in the scene? Well, what I'm trying to establish is the scale of these mountains in the background, because if I can get them looking right, then with the sky and everything else, then we've made it, we've answered the question. I know we've not said, well, what a Bryce unit is, but if it looks right, that was the aim. So I'm going to modify the material, and if I scale this down, it should stretch out the transition and also lift it up a bit, maybe. Oh, nope, that's not had the effect I'd hoped for. Maybe I need to scale it down quite a lot more. There we go, that's broken it up, and it's also moved it up a bit. So I just need to shove this up a little bit further, which means modifying the offset in here. So if I take the offset down, that has the effect of pushing it up. So this is just like moving the 0 point. So moving the 0 point down is taking it up. That's a little bit counterintuitive, I know, but oops, taking up far too much. That's because of the scaling factor. But that's the way it works, and if you change it so it's the other way round, because we tried that out actually, it breaks away that quite a lot of the other materials work. So it's sort of stuck with that kind of counterintuitive. If I did actual selection, I might be able to see the snow on the top of the mountain just in this view if I'm lucky. Oh, it's a bit hard to see. Let's have a look. Oh, you can just see it. So there, that would help me fine tune it rather than keep nipping backwards and forwards. So there you go, we've got the snow on the top of the mountains, and we could probably do with a stronger sunlight here. So I'll take the diffuse up to 200, and I'll lower the image based lighting a bit and check out of there and render. So okay, we've got those shadows might be a bit strong. I just wanted to get the impression that the sunlight was a bit stronger and from the angle it was coming from. Then I can lower the angle down a bit and it'll sort of graze across the surface of these things. It'll make it seem like it's later in the day. That green is probably a bit too green. So what I can do here is I can steal the colours from this scene, although that's very grey there. and that's a bit sort of bluey green. So I pop that in my other monitor, go over to the material and look for where that green, this green I think is the predominant one, and pick out something that's not quite as grey as that. Let's try something that's a bit brown and see if that has toned that down a bit. That's quite close to grey again. Maybe I'll add a bit more colour into that. So we could just shift it up here a bit, increase the saturation of that colour, and have another look. Okay, so I'm going to say that's close enough for the purposes of what we're aiming for here. The sky wants to be a bit darker, I think. I'm going to set the horizon colour to fully black, the sky colour to fully black, get rid of sun glow colour because that'll take that glow out of the sky there. If we go atmosphere, IBL and add to sky, that can increase the contrast in the sky, and then I'll lower the intensity perhaps. See if that gives a more natural look. I'm not really getting the high contrast that I had before, but bear in mind a lot of that could be the haze. So is the haze too thick here? I might drop it down to 1. Let's see if that might have made it too contrasty. I don't know. See, we're getting fully black here in the foreground, which indicates to me that the contrast is a bit high, but what we can do is shift that terrain a little bit further back into the haze. So we are getting some haze, so it's not fully black there. I'm going to increase the lighting again and aim to cover this gap up here with trees, or I could increase the scale of the thing still further and push it back. And the effect of this is just to get it a bit deeper into the haze to compensate for having made it a bit, you know, a bit thinner in order to have the sky a bit darker. That's the thing. So it's just juggling things around till it looks about right. So moving it back. Okay, I'm happy with that because the sky's a little bit darker here, which is what I was aiming for. The other thing I might be able to do, though it's going to mess with the lighting slightly, is I can adjust this, rotate it, so that the light source is not quite coming from where the sun is, but it does allow me to get a bit of a darker cloud in the sky there. Maybe I like that effect a bit better. So what's missing now? I need a water plane. So edit, create, and an infinite plane. Move it off to one side so it doesn't interfere with our object when it comes to selecting things, and modify the material for that. So what have we got in waters just here? Just something quick, useful and fast. Terrains. I should have probably got some water surface. There we go. Let's see. Lake water. Let's have a look how that looks. So I think that's okay. I think it'll do for now. Right. So what can we see here? This should be at 0, and the edge of the terrain, if we zoom back here, below 0. But just in case, what I want to do is duplicate that infinite plane and just take it down. So if anything gets to see through the water, it won't see the gap between these two. And this material will be, what do we look at here? Actual selection. No, we want to look at sphere, so that's our water surface. So that's going to be whatever the pebbly beach is that we're going to need to build here to give some foreground context, which I think is what I'm going to tackle next. So that is going to be the land, the ground under the water. That's our water surface. Here's our object. There's the edge of our massive terrain, and now I need to draw another terrain. So I'm going to create, hold the control key down. That creates a terrain in default grey, which is right in front of us now, and that wants to be about as big as that beach area. So I'm going to edit that and enlarge it and move it forward so it's in front of the camera and under this thing. Lift it up. Observe that as things stand, it's not very appropriate for what I've got in mind. I might need to make it bigger, I don't know. It depends how far away that looks. I can always drag that out a bit further. So I think the thing to do here is edit that and do new, and I'm going to just sort of paint in a bit of a cove shape, roughly speaking, like that, and not much else. Okay, so I don't know how that's going to look. It's just a bit of guesswork to start with, so I'll lower it down, and it's clearly below the level of the water now, and give this a render. It's looking a bit high compared with what we've got, so I'll lower it still further, give that a render, move it across towards the camera and across again. So I want that bit where it curves round and we can fit our object in. So I'll turn it slightly to get the curve on it. Move that in further. See, I think it's a bit too curved there, so I need to fill in a bit of more beach area in, oops, here. And then I can lower that and carve it out with a deleting brush. Let's see if that gets us more close to what we're looking for. So this is again a bit of trial and error. I'm using the nano preview now just to try and get a clue as to where we're going with this. Okay, so that's our bit of a headland in there, and it needs to come up just slightly, or I'll lower my camera down so it covers up the horizon bit. So that's our Y, so we'll lift that up and see how that looks. Okay, and we've got this thing that we're scaling now in the foreground, so I'll just move the water out of the way and see if I can grab that on its own. So if we've got everything from that, let's move it across, scale it up slightly and lift it up a bit so that it fits in there. Right, it's sort of in the water and partially on the beach there, which I think's our aim. I'm going to rotate it a bit more. Right. See, on the picture it's sort of it's bigger still because it's partially on the beach, so I'll try and aim to get it as like that as possible. Whoops, maybe I've got to move that forward now. As you can see, there's a lot of adjustment goes on in this that's not that interesting to watch as I fine-tune things backwards and forwards till it looks about right, but that is the answer to this question unfortunately. So I'll lift this up and try and drop it down so it's actually hitting the water surface, and if our water surface is at the 0 point, that should bring us so we can get it. Somehow has ended up a little bit bigger than I expected. I think I'll have to lift my camera position up, so we'll just, oh, there we go. Right, because I can see over the top of that in the example, but bear in mind that the example is just a composite image and we don't know what the relative camera angles are for these things. It looks to me like that needs squashing down a bit now to match up, or I need to modify the camera angle. So I'll try squashing it first of all to get it more or less, and move it across to the beach and away from the camera. Okay, and lower it very slightly, lower the camera view slightly so it's not quite halfway again. Somewhere in this region, we're getting there, somewhere in this region. I might just do some final adjustments when we've got things looking more like, now I think the water's supposed to go inside it, so that's not a bad thing, and it's coming up to the edge of the beach. I don't know, I'm not quite sure of the intent here, but I think that's getting closer. I'm just trying not to get it so that it's floating above the water, because that would look a bit weird. I want it to be in the water and the water to be in it. Hence these very fine adjustments. Okay, there. We'll try it there and see how that looks for now. This beach terrain, it's bothering because it's white, so let us terrains useful and fast. Actually shared. I've got one that says shared here. Somewhere in here, I think I shared some that were some pebbles. That might not be in that library. There we go. These are on Bryce5.com, and I've got one here that's pebbles and stones, so we'll try that one. I only want it to be on the flat, so we'll do that, and we'll change that to blend slope. I think looks pebbly. I think. Right, let's see what scale it comes out at now. It's got some green in there. So we'll modify that material, find out where that green's coming from, and pick one of the greys off the beach there. That should do for that. Maybe I will go back to fast slope there. We'll see how that turns out. It's looking a little bit light compared with the original, which was quite dark grey, but it'd be quite easy to modify that down. Just make it less responsive to the light. And it's not quite as yellow. So we'll have a look for putting some yellow in there from the other one to make it more like. It just depends whether that's getting mixed in or not, which it doesn't seem to be. Let's go average for that. So I'm just aware that I don't want to spend too long fine-tuning this material. What we could do is we could put in an altitude filter to give it a shoreline edge and then do a transition, but then again, this is about scale, so I don't want to get too lost in that kind of consideration, unless then it becomes a question. So this material, I think, our prototype object here is I'm going to drop the diffusion for that material as well, so that it's less responsive to the sunlight, but we still get some sunlight effect. I like to change the sun colour to make it slightly more yellow, not much, just to warm it up a little bit, because it can be a bit sterile, and I'll lower its intensity as well to bring some of those highlights down. So okay, it's looking a bit pink, that ground, so let's find out where the pink's coming from in here. That's a bit pinky, isn't it? So let's go for a grey for that one. Hopefully modify that a little bit. Yeah, that's better. So what else do we need now? Well, some trees. So we shall look at the create again. Let's go back to it's installed. So I think there's some special trees made by Brian Foley, and I like the special apple one here. Now I know the leaves are going to be a little bit off colour, and you can see that the camera angle is creating some weird distortions. That's actually upright, but because we've got this wide field of view, so I can correct for that by just tilting it. I'll enlarge it and tilt it slightly. Now there should be some way to edit the leaf colour here. So if I ungroup and edit and then go for the texture for, I think that's the leaves. I think that's the leaf. I don't know if I picked the wrong thing. Well, I'll go for uniform colour, because they just need to be sort of a pale, almost brown grey. Hopefully. I've got render preview. That's taking the red out of the leaves. The trunks, we'll go for a uniform. No, we'll go for modifying the material for those. Let's see. I know I've turned it uniform now anyway. Well, let's just make that sort of a dark, not that dark, dark grey-ish brown. It's not significant. We just want it to blend in better. Okay. The leaves are still red. I don't really do very much with trees. I'm just going to delete that, and we'll have to put up with the red-green leaves, because I can't figure out how to change it. And I use Bryce quite a lot, but I never really bother much with the trees. I know these are good-looking trees. I'm just not quite sure how you modify the materials on them, and that's really beyond the point of this video anyway. So there we go. That's not really quite the right size, but I'm just trying to get it so that it covers that bit of headland in. It's going to annoy me now that maybe if I can modify the whole material. Let's reset that to grey and see if that resets everything. Let's reset the leaves. Okay, I can settle with that. I can settle with that if I can get these the right sort of colour. There we go. That sort of colour to match the picture, because the red was a bit much. So if I put that on this edge and then copy and paste it a few times and drag it around, it will build up. No, I don't want to move that. If I can lock this terrain. This is when scenes get complicated, and I only tend to do very simple scenes, then it's easy to get a hold of lots of things simultaneously, which is just annoying. So that's why I tend to, when I build my scenes, use very few elements, because it's easier to select them then in the wireframe view, and try to get the materials to do most of the work. But here we need a bit of something going on with these trees, so I'm going to copy and paste those and just drag them over themselves and maybe sync them a bit to build up an area of dense foliage just here. You see the shadow regions. are very dense here. Now we can cheat. Instead of letting the shadows through with this global control, we can just let the shadows through the image-based lighting. So the image-based lighting will all get in, but we'll still have some predominant shadows here. So that's a way of getting some more light in there from the image-based lighting. That's not let that much through as it happens, but we'll lower the intensity still further. So this means that the light travels through solid objects and lights the thing behind it, so the tree shouldn't come out looking quite so dense. I'm going to drop that down to 0 and see if I can see an effect of that. Yeah, that is better. It's taken away the overall contrast of the image, and you can see what's going on here now. And I know I need to get more foliage in there, so I'll just do Ctrl+C, Ctrl+V and drop them down still further to make it really dense, because I don't want to see through there ideally. I'm just trying to block the view through there so that you can't see what's going on in there at all. And that's just to fill that area in. So have we got most of everything in place? I think the haze needs to be darker, so I'm going to lower the colour for the haze a bit to bring it down. I think that's starting to... The sky at the back actually looks a bit too dark now, so I'm going to rotate that around and lighten it up. This is in a fair bit of shadow, but because we took out the HDRI shadow casting, not only has it sped the render time up, which is a bonus, it's let more ambient light in, and you can get away with that to some extent. This could do with going up a bit on the beach terrain. If you're building complex scenes, it's a good idea to rename the components, like I have not done so, but that's just me demonstrating my laziness in the way I'm going about this. I've locked it, haven't I? That's why I can't increase its height. So if I select that terrain, go to attributes, unlock it now, I just wanted to lift the beach up a bit here at the back so it crosses the horizon there. Then we have to look at what implications it has here. You can see the beach is now invading the model a little bit, so I'm going to get hold of that model again if I can and move it off to... Oops. Let's see what I'm doing. Move it off to the left here till it's not quite clipping that terrain. You can drag it in the view, you might drag it up and down at the same time. So here we go. It's a little bit off to the left there. Maybe if I just move the camera around slightly, it won't break things too badly. There we go. I'm just looking where that's coming in under there. Now I've got this material on the terrain, and so if I select the terrain and then... Is this the water plane or the under the water area? That's the water plane, so that must be my under the water area. So I'm going to select that and then my under the water plane, go to the material. Because I selected the terrain first, it will apply that pebbly material to underneath this water, so that will prevent the rays going through the water, which is transparent, and then seeing the transparent layer and then continuing, and then whatever's underneath the ground now getting into the render. So that just solves that issue. This looks a little bit high resolution, this material, as it happens, so I'm going to lower that down a little bit. So if I descale that, we'll see more of these pebbly details here. That might be a little bit rough for this, which is it's got very close to the camera just here. But you know, we could lift the camera up, move the camera around. You've seen me do all that. The question is now, how are things looking as far as scale is concerned? So I'm going to give this a render and say, bar a lot of very fine adjustments to things, that's probably demonstrated how I would go about it. So the key points are: scale your terrains up to around about 4000 by 4000, keeping their aspect for height. Shove them back in the view until they start interacting with the haze in the sky, and I set that up 100 density and 1 or 2% thickness. I think that's what I usually go for, and then just keep fine-tuning things and repeatedly referring to your reference image. So that has gone on quite a bit. I'm not going to apologise for that, because I did warn you at the beginning that it was going to, so that we could really get into the the process. Tedious though I'm sure that's been. So there you go, that's the final render, more or less complete. We'll just bring in our reference image again, and I will let you be the judge of whether or not scale wise we're getting in the right region. I think that I would, I could obviously spend another couple of hours on this, fine-tuning the materials, fine-tuning the camera position, and lifting the mounting up a bit, or modifying its height map, changing this, because I think I might have accidentally modified the scale on that a little bit. But the thing is that it may never be possible to get exactly this effect in this scene, because this was taken with one camera attitude, what is it called, the field of view, for the camera there, and this could well be another one. So the perspectives on these two objects, it may never be possible to match them perfectly as per this image, because it's a composite. If this was a photograph and it had both elements in it, then you could reasonably, if you were very careful, match the two things. So there you go, that's the image, and there's the render. Okay, and that's the end of the video. So I hope you found that interesting and not too boring. Cheers now.